What if saving one dog meant breaking an entire family? Last winter, in a small Montana shelter, 8 black and tan German Shepherds screamed when we tried to clip a leash onto just one of them. Today, on the first morning of 2026, that same family is asleep by my fireplace, and I want you to see how they stayed together. Outside the windows, Montana is snow and frost, white light on a January morning. Inside, the sounds are simple. Breathing, a log shifting in the fire, the faint tick of claws when someone shifts in their sleep. If you walked in right now, you'd see the picture, long before you noticed me. Seren is curled closest to the flames, her coat catching the glow. Rook lies just behind her, not quite touching. Now and then he opens one eye and counts the others. The rest of the family has poured itself across the rug, Alder sprawled with no respect for personal space, Kiro at the edge where he can see the door even in his dreams, Lilou pressed against the arm of my chair, Veraine stretched between the younger ones in the room, Thimble asleep with one of my wool socks in his mouth, Oslo taking up so much floor that I have to step over him to reach my coffee. It looks peaceful now, almost too peaceful when you know their voices on the other side of a kennel door. You see a New Year's morning, 8 dogs dozing in front of a fire, a rescued puppy dream twitching at my feet. But I still hear the way that shelter room erupted in panic when someone tried to walk out with just one. On this first day of 2026, before the year really begins, I want to tell you why we refuse to let this family be broken and what it cost us to say, we'll take them all. A house doesn't scream when it empties, it just stops sounding. About 1.5 years ago, before 8 shepherds ever touched this floor, our place in Montana was too tidy and too quiet. The kids were scattered across states, their rooms half full of boxes and old posters. The kind of mess that looks permanent until one weekend it just vanishes into a moving truck. After they left, the hallway still carried our footsteps, but the echoes didn't answer back. That was the first time I remember feeling old, not in my bones, but in the way the silence pressed on my chest. Most evenings it was just me, Celeste, and the hum of the refrigerator. She read on the couch. I pretended to watch the news and mostly watched the doorway, like someone might still walk in and ask what was for dinner. One night she turned the TV off without asking and said, "You need to see this." She set her phone between us. In the video, the camera shook a little, pointed at a row of kennels in a small shelter. 8 black and tan German Shepherds moved like one body behind the wire. When a worker tried to clip a leash on one of the younger dogs, the whole family exploded forward. They howled, clawed, pressed against the gate, and Rook threw his weight across the opening like he could physically stop the world from taking that dog. What caught me wasn't the noise. It was Lilou. She glued herself to Seren's side, her whole body trembling, her eyes locked straight into the lens. There was this quiet, desperate question in them, like she was asking whoever was watching, "Did you lose someone too?" I made some dry comment about agitated dogs and bad phone lighting, because that's easier than saying your throat hurts. But in my head, I was back in the driveway, waving as our son pulled away for college. I was in the guest room, looking at the empty bed where my brother used to crash on road trips, knowing he wouldn't be back to stay. The same feeling, something leaving that you can't follow. Celeste went to make tea. I stayed on the couch with the phone. I watched that little clip once, then again, 5 times through, maybe more, the sound of that family folding in on itself every time the leash moved. At some point, my hand just moved. I hit the number under the video just to ask about foster options. The way you say just when you already know it's not just. A woman picked up on the second ring. And before I could finish explaining which German Shepherd family I meant, she sighed and said, "It's a big family. Are you sure you want to hear the whole story?" No one is ready for how a family sounds when someone tries to take their child. A few days after that phone call, Celeste and I pulled into the little shelter on the edge of town. Snow had been pushed into dull gray piles along the fence, and our breath hung in the air when we stepped out. Inside it was bleach, metal, and dry dog food. The smells of survival, not comfort. A volunteer walked us down a narrow hallway, talking quietly. She said the German Shepherd family had come in after their owners lost their house. They'd tried to keep the easiest ones, the quietest, the dogs who didn't take up as much space, and surrendered the rest as if they were one item on a list. Hearing it put like that made my stomach twist. We turned a corner, and there they were. 8 black and tan bodies in one kennel, pressed together, moving like parts of the same heartbeat. My eyes went straight to him before she even said his name. Rook. He stood a little apart, not relaxed, not resting, just counting. His gaze tracked from Seren to Alder to Kiro to Veraine to Thimble to Oslo to Lilou, back to Seren, over and over as if he could keep them all here just by checking. The volunteer lowered her voice. She told us they'd tried to do a normal meet and greet the week before. One of the younger dogs had been clipped to a leash to go outside with a potential adopter. The second that gate opened, she said, the whole family lost it. They threw themselves at the door, claws scraping, voices cracking into a single raw sound. Seren hit the frame so hard with her paw she limped for the rest of the day. While she was talking, someone at the far end of the room opened another kennel door. It wasn't for them. Didn't matter. The family felt the shift of air and metal and reacted like a wire had been pulled. Lilou plastered herself against Seren's side so fast you'd think she'd been pushed. Veraine stepped forward, shoulders squared, putting her body between the younger ones and the opening even though it was 20 feet away. Alder rushed toward the front, muscles tight, ready to follow anyone who tried to leave, no matter where it went. Standing there, I didn't see 8 adoptable dogs. I saw one nervous, breathing organism trapped behind bars, terrified of being torn apart piece by piece. That same rescued puppy from the video was right in front of me now, and her eyes were even more desperate in person. The volunteer sighed. She said they were doing their best to keep them together, but space was tight. They couldn't hold a whole family forever. If separate homes came along, they'd have to start letting them go one by one or turn away other dogs who needed in. I looked down the row of kennels, listened to the soft whines starting in Seren's throat, watched Rook start his silent count again. Then I glanced at Celeste. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching Lilou, hand on her chest the way she does when something hurts in a place she can't name. In her eyes, I saw it. She had already decided something, and the certainty in her face scared me more than that howl behind the door ever could. No one plans to sign up for madness. One day your hand just moves and the pen does it for you. They sat us down in a tiny office with metal chairs and a stack of forms between us. On the other side of the wall, I could still hear the soft shifting of paws, the kind of sound you only notice when your own house has been quiet too long. The woman across the desk smiled in that careful way people do when they're about to be reasonable. She laid it out like a menu. We could take 2, maybe 3 of the German Shepherds home for a while. The rest would stay here. Short-term foster, see how it goes, help the shelter free up space. It all sounded responsible, measured, adult. My brain went straight to math, square footage, fencing, vet bills, our age, how many years we had left to carry big bags of food and bigger bills, future hip problems, not just theirs, if I'm honest. While I was drowning in numbers, Celeste was watching the dogs. Through the office window, we could see the kennel row. Thimble had managed to hook my glove through the wire and was parading with it like he'd just stolen a crown. Oslo bumped a metal bowl with his hip and jumped back, surprised by his own clumsiness, tail still thumping. Kiro stayed a little behind the others, eyes steady, taking everything in as if he'd file it away before deciding whether we deserved his trust. Then the woman said it. Calm, practical, like she was discussing shelving. Realistically, we'll probably have to separate the parents. No one is going to take this many dogs together. Rook started to shake. He pressed his body against Seren's side so hard that her ribs moved with his breath. The rest of the family folded toward them, shoulder to shoulder, one tight knot of fear and fur. You could see the question ripple through them without a sound. Who disappears next? Before I could form a single smart sentence, I heard my wife's voice. "We can't let you split them," she said, as if she'd been rehearsing it all her life. "We'll take them as a family." Everything inside me dropped. My stomach, my careful plans, all the sensible speeches I'd prepared about being in our mid-50s and needing a quiet winter. Panic flared, sharp and bright. Then Lilou moved. She pushed her paw through the gap in the wire until it found my hand, light as a question. I curled my fingers around that rescued puppy's paw and felt my answer settle in my chest before my mouth ever said it. The paperwork was still untouched on the desk. Back then, I honestly thought this would be one wild season, just a winter with dogs. I had no idea how completely these 8 would rewrite what home meant for us. Turns out you can fill an empty house in one evening. You just have to open the door for 8 tails. The night we brought them home, the sky over Montana was dark and low, and our driveway disappeared under fresh snow. By the time we'd made 2 trips from the truck, the clean white was gone, replaced by a wild pattern of paw prints, like someone had stamped life all over our yard. Inside, the warmth hit their noses first, and then everything happened at once. We lined up metal bowls along the kitchen wall, 8 in a row, and the sound of kibble pouring out felt louder than the TV ever did. Wet paw prints bloomed on the tile, little smudges of melted snow following us back and forth. Thimble grabbed one of my socks from the entry bench and trotted off down the hall with it, tail high, looking for whatever secret hiding spot he'd already claimed in his mind. Oslo turned too fast, smacked his tail into a chair, then into the table, then into the wall, apologizing with every wag. Seren moved through the chaos like a quiet patrol. She checked each bowl, each nose, each corner of the room, touching them one by one as if she were counting under her breath. Rook traced a slow circle behind her, head low, sniffing each of his dogs, making sure every familiar scent was exactly where it belonged. You could see his chest loosen just a little when everyone finally settled. At some point, I sat down in my old armchair just to get out of the way. Lilou followed as if there was a string between us. She curled up beside me, the kind of rescued puppy that doesn't ask permission, just lays her head on your knee and trusts you to hold the weight of it. My hand found her ears on instinct, and for the first time in a long time, the silence in my head wasn't empty. It was full of breathing. In the corner, Veraine planted herself between Kiro and the clatter of dishes Celeste was washing, her body a calm barrier. Kiro watched the kitchen from behind her shoulder, eyes soft but guarded, like he was still deciding whether this warmth would stay. Everywhere I looked, something moved, sighed, shifted. Every minute, the house exhaled a little more dust and took in fur instead. On paper, it was still temporary. If you pulled up the shelter's website that night, you'd see 8 separate profiles, 8 black and tan faces, all listed as available. You could click a button to ask about just one. I tried not to think about that as we turned off the lights and stepped over bodies to get to bed. But the next afternoon, an email pinged my phone. A family, it said, was interested in meeting Alder. Just Alder. I always thought a dog's heart beat quietly, until I heard it break out loud. The morning of Alder's meet and greet, the house knew before I did. Rook started shadowing him from the moment he got up, nose to Alder's shoulder, to his flank, to his tail, circling back like he was checking for missing pieces. Seren lay by the front door and refused to move, her eyes fixed on the handle as if she could keep it from turning just by staring hard enough. I tried to make it normal. Coffee, boots, keys in the bowl. I clipped the leash to Alder's collar and he pressed into my side, solid and willing, because that's who he is. The moment I opened the door, the rest of the family flooded the hallway. All 8 bodies pressed toward the threshold. Lilou let out this thin little squeak that wasn't quite a bark, not quite a cry, just the sound of a rescued puppy who remembers too much. Kiro planted himself in the middle of the corridor like a soldier who hasn't been given clear orders, eyes darting between Alder and me. Veraine stood broad and steady across the gap, then stepped aside only when Alder nudged past her, like she'd needed to see his choice herself. At the shelter, it was worse. We walked Alder past the kennel where the others waited, just for a few hours. The second they saw the leash pull tight, the air split open. Seren hit the front of the gate with her chest. Rook lunged to cover the opening. The younger ones surged forward until fur and paws blurred together. Veraine threw herself in front of the door, body low, as if she honestly believed she could hold the world in place. The couple who came to meet Alder were kind people. You could tell by their faces, by the way they knelt down and let him sniff their hands, by how they flinched at the sound of that family's grief. They said they'd seen his picture online, that they wanted just one dog to start with. They kept glancing at the kennel, at the bodies pressing and shivering and calling. I watched Alder. He was polite, gentle, everything a person could want. But every time they tried to lead him a few steps away, his head turned back, ears locked on the direction of the noise. He wasn't listening to new voices. He was counting the ones he already knew. After a while, the couple stood up, eyes wet and overwhelmed, and said they needed time to think. I nodded. I put Alder back in my truck and sat there with my hands on the wheel, not turning the key. I told you I'd bring you back to them tonight, I whispered, my voice sounding older than I felt. And in that moment, I knew I didn't have the right to break that promise. Some promises we make to children, some we make to dogs. Keeping them hurts the same. When I pulled back into our driveway with Alder, the porch light caught his coat, and for a second he froze, listening. Then the sound hit us, not a bark, a chorus. Inside, claws scrambled on wood, bodies rushed the door, voices stacked on top of each other until it was almost one long note of relief. The second I opened it, the family poured out. Seren pushed her head under Alder's chin like a mother checking for injuries. Rook circled him, nose to shoulder, to ribs, to tail, counting the way he always does. Thimble bounced against his legs. Oslo almost knocked us both over. Veraine moved everyone back just enough so he could step fully into the house. Lilou pressed herself to his side and stayed there, eyes closed like she'd finally exhaled. Watching them, I felt something tear and stitch at the same time. Years earlier, when our last kid packed up a car and drove off to a new city, I walked through this same house counting chairs. 1 at the table, 2, 3, 4. My brain knew where they were, but my heart kept checking, like maybe I'd missed a person in the math somewhere. Rook does the same thing with dogs. I recognized the look. That night in the kitchen, after everyone finally settled, Celeste stood with her hands around a mug she'd forgotten to drink. She said she couldn't handle the way Seren shakes when a car door slams outside, how her eyes lock on the driveway like she's waiting for someone to disappear again. This isn't just noise to them, she whispered. This is remembering. A few days later, we sat at our dining table staring at a laptop screen. On the other end was the woman who'd first answered my call about this family. She told us they'd shifted their work a few years back, tried to keep dog families together whenever they could. She'd seen what happened when they didn't. Brothers who stopped eating when their littermate left. Mothers pacing themselves raw. Dogs who finally relaxed only when a familiar scent came back into the room. There's research on it now, she said. Lower stress, better adjustment when they stay with at least one family member. Then she sighed and glanced around her own crowded space. The problem is, we don't have enough room. If no one steps up to take a group, we have to start placing them one by one. We need a miracle, really. People who say, we'll take all of them. Before I could overthink it, I heard my own voice in the quiet between us. What if those people, I said, are already us? Sometimes the scariest part isn't losing a home, it's filling it again. We sat at the kitchen table one night with a cheap spiral notebook between us, like we were planning a vacation instead of the rest of our lives. I wrote numbers in shaky little columns. Food for 8 German shepherds, vet visits, emergencies, rugs that would never be clean again, our ages, how many more winters we could realistically promise. I'm not proud of it, but I'll say it plain. I was scared of getting old with a whole dog family depending on us, scared something would happen to me or to Celeste while these dogs still needed lifting into the truck or help up the stairs. It's one thing to open your door for a rescued puppy. It's another to admit you might not be strong enough forever. Around us, the house answered every fear with fur. Lilou slept against my foot, her breathing slow and heavy, like she'd finally decided this place could hold her dreams. Thimble dragged a kitchen towel toward whatever hideout he'd claimed under the couch. Oslo sprawled belly up across half the sofa, paws in the air, taking up so much space he might as well have signed his own name on the cushions. Celeste watched them for a long time before she spoke. We always told the kids, she said quietly, that home is where nobody splits you up. Why should it be different for them? She nodded towards Seren and Rook asleep nose to nose on the rug. We talked in circles about maybe finding another miracle family, someone younger, someone with more land, more savings, more everything. But every time we looked up from the page, 8 pairs of paws and 8 beating hearts were already here. They weren't waiting for a family, they were living with one. So we called the rescue again. There were emails, long forms, talk about liability, insurance, what it means on paper to be responsible for a whole dog family and not just one sweet face. Eventually, a final document arrived, printed in black and white, adopted as a family. I sat there with the pen in my hand, staring at those words. Lilou shifted, opened one eye, and laid her paw firmly on my knee. That was the moment I lifted the pen. I thought signing would make it easier. Instead, it made everything heavier. We went back to the shelter office on a gray afternoon and did what adults do. We initialed boxes, answered questions, nodded at words like liability and lifetime care. At the bottom of the last page, my name went next to adopted as a family. And just like that, there were no more temporary labels left on these dogs. They were ours, in ink. We drove home with the truck full of breathing and fur, and for a few hours it felt almost simple. Everyone ate. Everyone found their usual spots on the rug. The house settled into that new normal we were still learning to trust. Then Rook coughed. At first it was just one rough sound, then another. By morning, his chest was working harder than it should, and the old stiffness in his legs seemed worse. Nothing dramatic, nothing you'd put in a movie, just the kind of quiet change that makes your stomach drop when you love something that can't explain where it hurts. At the clinic, I sat on a plastic chair while Rook lay on the floor with his head between his paws. Seren paced a tight circle around him, whining under her breath whenever the vet leaned in to listen. Lilou dropped a favorite toy by his nose and backed away, as if she was afraid to touch him, but more afraid to leave it behind. Oslo flopped down against Rook's back, his big body a clumsy kind of shield. I watched them take care of each other without being told how. It looked a lot like a human family I used to know. I'd be lying if I said my first feeling was courage. It was guilt. I had signed for them. I had said with a shaky hand that I would be there through all of this. What if I can't keep up? I thought. What if something happens to us before it stops happening to them? While the vet listened to Rook's chest, I remembered that earlier conversation with the woman from the shelter. Her talking about dogs who stopped eating when their brother or mother vanished, about stress going down when they stayed with at least one familiar body, about how family isn't just a word people like to use on adoption days. She finished her exam, gave Rook a gentle scratch behind the ear, and stood up. It's an old issue flaring up, she said. Scary, but manageable. With the right meds and some rest, he should be okay. Then she glanced at Seren pressed to his side, at Lilou hovering nearby, at the way the others had arranged themselves in a loose ring around him. With his family here, she added, it's definitely easier on him. On the drive home, I looked at Rook in the rearview mirror, surrounded by the dogs who would not let him face anything alone. Our choice was starting to make a deep kind of sense. And still, underneath that, the fear stayed. Sometimes a miracle moment looks so simple you almost miss it. By the time summer rolled over Montana, you wouldn't have recognized this place as the same house that once echoed. Grass wore the mark of 8 German shepherds running the same joyful routes. Paths to the fence, to the shade, to the back step where the treat jar lives. Rook stopped counting out loud, if you can call what he did out loud. One evening, I watched him lie down in the middle of the yard, head on his paws, eyes drifting shut while half the family was still exploring. He didn't get up to check, didn't pace, didn't nudge anyone back into his line of sight. He just trusted that the world would not steal them while he blinked. For him, that was a miracle. Seren started playing again. Not the tense, half-hearted fetch you see in dogs who are still on guard, but real play. She chased a faded tennis ball across the grass with her ears flying and her mouth open in a clumsy grin, nipping at Alder when he got there first, letting Thimble steal it and parade like a champion. For a few seconds at a time, the weight fell off her. And Lilou, my little shadow, found her voice in other ways. On days when I sat too long in my chair, sinking into the same rut of thoughts about age and limits, she would nudge my hand, then my knee, then my chest, and finally shove her whole rescued puppy body between me and the cushion. If that didn't work, she'd trot to the door, look back, and huff until I got up to follow. She decided we were still going to move. In late fall, the rescue called about a frightened loner who needed a place to land for a bit. We said yes, thinking we were the ones offering comfort. Turned out the real work would be done by the dogs. When that scared little stray stepped onto our yard, Veraine slid between her and the wind chime noise that made her flinch, just standing there like a quiet wall. Alder bowed and barked, then darted away and back again, inviting her to chase something other than her own fear. Watching them teach another dog how to feel safe, I understood something I'd missed when I was busy counting costs. We hadn't just kept one family together. We'd built a place strong enough that other dogs could rest inside it too. I'm 55. For a long time, I thought the big chapters were already written. Kids raised, careers done, stories told. I didn't expect a pack of shepherds to hand me a new one. Which brings me back to this morning, January 1st, 2026. I pour my coffee, look at 8 sleeping bodies by the fire, and realize I don't want a quiet new year after all. I want to say something to you. If you walked in right now, you'd see just a cozy scene. But every face here is part of a miracle. It's early on the first morning of 2026. There's a thin lace of frost on the windows, the kind that turns the yard into a painting. The kettle rattles on the stove, and Celeste has cinnamon in the oven because she says the house should smell warm when a new year starts. This routine used to be a checklist. Now it feels like a small ceremony. Bowls lined up, food poured, 8 heads bent in the quiet rhythm of breakfast. Then the back door opens and they spill into the snow, leaving a mess of paw prints and kicked up powder that will melt and refreeze a dozen times before spring. They come back in like a tide. Wet noses, fogged breath, melted snow turning our floor into a map of everywhere they've been. Thimble snatches a small ornament that somehow survived the tree and trots over to me, tail wagging, ready to trade it for a scratch and a laugh. Oslo misjudges the space between the table and a chair, bumps the leg, and Celeste laughs in that open, bright way I haven't heard since the kids were still slamming doors upstairs. The fire is going, but Lilou doesn't pick the warmest spot anymore. She chooses my feet. She turns twice, curls into the space between the chair and the coffee table, and rests her chin on my boot. Like this is the safest ground she knows. Seren and Rook lie where they can see everyone, guardians of a kingdom made of blankets and chew toys. If your house echoes when you drop your keys, if your kids' rooms look too neat, if you've lost a dog before and the thought of loving another feels more dangerous than the quiet, I'm talking to you. I know what it is to stand in that space between wanting company and being terrified of goodbyes. We're not heroes. We're not rich. We're just 2 people in their mid-50s who once looked at a scared dog family and said, "We won't be the ones who split you up." The rescue has told us about other families since then, people who took in bonded pairs, trios, whole little clusters that needed to stay together. Every time I hear one of those stories, it reminds me this isn't a fairy tale. It's just regular people choosing together over easy. I set my coffee down and pick up the camera, bringing it a little closer so you can see the frost on whiskers, the slow rise and fall of sleeping ribs. I take a breath that feels bigger than my lungs. And now, I say, since it's the very first day of 2026, let me wish you something. If you're hearing this story, you're already part of our pack. So happy 2026. From a small house in Montana and 8 sleeping shepherds by a fire. I wish you a year of soft mornings and quiet nights. I wish you love that doesn't scare you, peace that actually reaches your chest, kindness that doesn't run out. And for every dog out there, I wish a warm corner, a real blanket, clean water, and a bowl that's never empty. As I talk, Seren shifts closer to Rook, their noses touching. Lilou is still at my feet, breathing slow, trusting this will all still be here when she wakes up. Alder, Kiro, Thimble, Veraine, Oslo, all tangled together in one safe pile of fur. They're proof that family can be 8 dogs and 2 people who decided not to let anyone cut that shape apart. But while this room is quiet, I know there are kennels tonight where it isn't. Somewhere, a door opens and a leash jingles, and a dog family cries because one body is leaving. Somewhere, someone is saying, "We can only take one." And that same sharp howl I heard last winter is tearing a hole in the air again. Our little Seren-Rook clan is just one answer to that sound, but it doesn't have to be the only one. To me, this little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. They're the ones standing in those hallways, trying to buy families a little more time together. They're the reason a scared, rescued puppy ever made it onto our rug. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's deciding, over and over, not to look away. Thank you for staying with us at Brave Paws, for watching, for feeling this with us. In this new year, our mission is simple and stubborn. Keep helping dogs, keep families together when we can. Keep reminding the world that compassion matters more than convenience. Maybe you'll adopt, maybe you'll foster, maybe you'll just share this story so another set of eyes sees a different way to love. If this family sleeping behind me tells you anything, let it be this. You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes you just have to say, we won't let you face this alone, and mean it. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.